Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of the Honest Mamas podcast. This is Melissa, and today I had the absolute joy of speaking with Beth Berry about modern day mothering. Beth is a writer, a whole life coach, mother of 4 daughters, and a devotee of the sacred feminine. She helps women realize their fullest potential and reclaim motherhood. She believes that awakening women who live from their strengths and know themselves to be lovable, worthy, and beautiful are powerful beyond measure and essential to the healing of the world. Here's my conversation with Beth. Beth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me to be here, Melissa.
I'm so excited. I've actually been really looking forward to this conversation today. And how I got introduced to Beth was from one of her articles that was circulating social media like a firestorm. And it was about the village and when mothers don't have the village anymore to come back to. It was called The Absence of the Village. And so that's my first introduction to you. And I thought maybe we could just start with a very brief introduction of who you are and kind of what got you into writing this amazing blog and offering all the support for women and for mothers.
So I am a mother of 4 daughters. I think it feels important to start there.
Yes.
They're 10, 13, 17, and almost 23. So I've been at it for a little bit. And I am a life coach. That title feels a little, it's like the closest thing professionally to what I do. But what I would say that I'm really doing in my work is helping women and mothers reclaim a sense of wholeness, to kind of take back all the pieces of themselves or find them again within themselves, having lost them through the experiences of motherhood often, and life, all the ways that we hide parts of ourselves or repress things about us that we end up then feeling like there's something missing from my experience or from my life or from something holding us back from feeling whole as people. And so that's really my work in the world, is to help people figure that out and sort of walk alongside them as they get back to a greater sense of wholeness. That article came about in response to, well, let me backtrack a little bit. I lived with my family in Mexico for 4 years. Mm-hmm. Got a really unique perspective on the differences in child rearing there versus here. And I did some volunteer work in some indigenous communities that was really affecting to me. And what I saw over and over and over was that these people were truly impoverished in so many ways, and yet they had a peace about them and an ease in parenthood that I just much in our more privileged culture. And so it was that kind of started me thinking along these lines. And then in my work with women, it's just a common theme, this feeling of isolation and not even knowing whether what they're going through is normal or not, and having to rely on books to check in with that question of, am I normal? Is this okay? Or am I doing it wrong, so to speak?
Yeah.
And that really what they seem to be hungry for is actual people, women in their community, in their neighborhood, in their lives, who can witness them in their process and help to alleviate some of the burden. And it just feels like wholly missing from our culture.
I think that's why that article in particular, I mean, you've written quite a few really beautiful pieces that I've checked out on your blog. And that one, again, was my intro to you. And also, I think one of the ones that really spoke to my experience as a mother and many of the mothers that I've spoken with. And it's just reminding me, before we hopped on the call, I was again checking out some of your blogs. And one of I think it was in your About Me section, you mentioned there's this image I got as you mentioned yourself at 17 years old in high school, pumping in the bathroom. And then you talk about this village. And to me, it just feels like such an isolating, number one, wow, you were so young. And number two, like, I'm so curious, that experience must have been quite isolating, or I don't know, just that image just feels so separate from community for me for some reason.
Yeah. So I started out in this journey of motherhood when I was 17. And what's so ironic about that is that, yes, that image does sort of makes me, when I bring that image to mind, it does seem like a pretty isolating thing. But I actually felt so well supported as a 17-year-old mother because I was still living with my parents.
Yes.
The first 2 years, my parents were amazing, and so I actually had more support in the first couple of years of parenthood than I did when I then moved out and went off to college and ended up getting married and having more kids. I had more support when I was, because I had grandma and grandpa right there who were so willing and so to be a part of our experience and naturally supportive, because they couldn't think of anything they'd rather be doing anyway. They loved her. So there was always somebody playing with the baby, and I had two sisters too. So there's always someone playing with the baby while someone else was cooking, while someone else was picking up. And just
heaven.
And it seems like a no-brainer when you talk about it. Like, well, of course, that's what family does for each other. But most of us are not in that set of circumstances at all. So it really struck me as so interesting that as a teenage mom, I actually felt like I was in a better position to be mothering than when I was out on my own in a more traditional way, because I had people around me it wasn't as if it was a burden to them. They were loving their family,
And that is such a gift because, with everybody on this planet, you might be pregnant at 17 if you're listening, and you may not have the supportive family. But I think there is something to be said, perhaps this thread of as we get older and we move out of our family's home and we're standing on our 2 feet and we're married or we're not married, but we're bringing a baby into the world. There is this concept perhaps that, well, you're older now, you can do this, versus when you're 17, there is sort of this, like, you don't know what you're doing, I'm going to help, kind of stepping in.
That's right. And that is very true, that we have this model of independence that you shouldn't need people as much as you get older. But I think motherhood is such a radical shift in our lives that's sort of under-recognized for the profound effects that it has. Like, most of us are pretty shocked by how much it changes us and how we feel we're wholly inequipped, too, to deal with that change. Hormonally is big, and then for example, women who are in careers they really appreciate and they love and fully intend to go back to, and then they have this tiny little baby and go, wait, I don't actually want to leave my baby to go back to work. And then at the same time, they're feeling completely overwhelmed by being home with the baby, thinking maybe if I went back to work, there's sort of an all or nothing thing we've got going on right now in culture. There's not a lot of part-time work with benefits. I think that right there speaks to so many people's struggles as so it's all or nothing. We either put our kids in daycare, many people, and feel a sense of loss there, or we stay home and give up our career track or our passions in order to be fully invested in the home life and kids. And just really feels as if of a greater balance there. If we had a culture that was supporting part-time employment and that really that was more mother-child centric and less, money and productivity centric, perhaps.
And that leads me, as we were chatting before this podcast today, we were talking about modern day motherhood. And I'm just so curious, this kind of leads me into that curiosity about how you define that and how you think this differs from the past and how it can leave mothers feeling.
This is something that I'm really been thinking about a lot the past few years, because as I work with mothers, this theme keeps arising around, like, I'm sensing oppression. Really, people feel still pretty oppressed by their circumstances, even though we have this freedom, quote unquote. We're free to choose whether we stay home or not, most of us, whether we go back to work. But the structures in place don't actually support a felt sense of freedom. Because the choices were being given between, again, the all or nothing. It doesn't feel freeing, So modern day motherhood, from my perspective, it's bringing a whole new set of stressors and oppressions to mothers, largely because of the pace at which we're moving. That's not really conducive to. It's not the pace that is natural or even healthy for that early childhood, right? Or the postpartum phase, where we actually slow down a lot in order to meet our needs in a different way and allow for healing, allow for the bonding and getting used to this brand new teeny tiny being and the way that it's completely, you turn our lives upside down. It's just not honored. We're just supposed to snap right back to who we were. I wrote a blog post about that very thing, about, we're not meant to bounce back after baby. It's a really destructive myth within our culture. Motherhood is meant to change us. The reason it feels like we shouldn't change is because the rest of the culture is not honoring this shift.
Right. It's almost like, okay, you had a baby, now get back to it. Go back to the way that you were, the things that you thought, the body that you had. I mean, it hits you on so many different levels. And I agree with you. It feels like there's nobody in our culture saying exactly what you just said. Slow down, take your time, rest with your baby, take the time you need. Your body's going to shift. Be patient, be kind, be loving. How do you get to know this person now?
Right. And this new version of you is a thing to be celebrated. And part of, I think, the reason that we're not celebrating it is because it's a really new version of ourselves that is kind, for a time anyway, is more dependent. We need support. That goes completely against this, American model of independence and self-sufficiency and efficiency and such. We become like, we feel like we're falling apart after the baby's born many times.
Oh, yeah.
And we're like, what's wrong with me that I can't keep it together? When really there's a shift happening that requires that we show up differently for ourselves, and that other people are around us kind of picking up the slack and helping out with the meals and helping out with the older children. That these things would be happening more if we had still more of that village model.
Absolutely. I even think about that as your 17-year-old pregnant self, and you're saying one person is cooking, the other person's playing with the baby, the other person is tidying up. Like, it just makes my whole nervous system relax.
Yep. And I've had other experiences. I've kind of gotten a taste of that. I have a couple of cousins who are in their early 20s and beautiful, amazing girls, and they've lived with us for stretches of time, say, 3 or 4 months at a time. And it changed everything. It changed everything because they brought a sort of a playful spirit to my kids' lives. They were eager to learn. Like, we would talk about the dinners that we were going to cook, and they'd get excited because they wanted to learn from me, learn how to cook. So I had this sort of like enthusiasm around something that had become like, I sort of felt like a kitchen slave. Now I have this new energy in my kitchen of somebody's like, teach me. I want to learn how to, cook these things. Or, hey, can I take the kids out and play at the park while you cook? I mean,
wow.
What total game changer. And what we're talking about is creating more connection among the generations, because they want it too. They were fed, as much as I was, as much as my children were, by these experiences.
Absolutely. And I remember, I've talked about this on our podcast before, but I remember giving birth, being in the hospital, and just really craving a wise elder. There's like no other way to describe it other than that. Like somebody, like a big mom figure or something that, I always imagined a very large, bustful woman that would, come in and just allow me to cry, allow me to, feel the grief, allow me to feel the anger, just any feelings, and also be further along in the journey to also hold the hope and the knowing that you will get through it. And I think we so miss that in this culture, in this society.
I think it's really true. Very, very, very true. I know that looking back at my own experience, and again, I feel uniquely blessed by having parents who really supported me at that time. But when I think back to the ways that my own mom supported me when I had this brand new baby and I was trying to figure out how to nurse her, and how many ways that she just simply and confidently would say, "Oh, you're doing great. Yeah, it hurts. Like, nursing for the first few times, it's kind of painful. You got this. You're doing great." Just that feeling that someone else was me and saying, "It's going to be fine. This is hard." It's meant to be a new challenge. This is a new challenge for you. You're not doing anything wrong.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Beth, as a mother and as working with a lot of mothers in my psychotherapy practice and friends, that to me always feels like the go-to feeling of we must be screwing it up. It must be something that I'm doing that is somehow, my kid is screaming. What am I doing?
That's right.
We blame the heck out of ourselves.
I think this is another sort of a unique thing about this modern day motherhood is that we've raised parenting standards and taken support away. We've got more pressure to perform and more information. We're kind of drowning in information when it comes to what's the right way, what's the best way, how should we be doing things, and yet we've got less connection and those deeper, richer connections and everyday connections, and less support across the board. So it's creating this kind of impossible scenario, and it's creating a setup for a sense of inadequacy, where we are trying so hard to get it all right.
Yes.
Within circumstances that are working against us.
And even just thinking about how we prepare to become mothers, when we're pregnant, and, what are we drawn towards? Do we focus on the shopping? Do we focus on the crib purchase and the clothes and all that, which of course have their place and value and importance. However, I think a lot of us miss, I remember at one point in the journey of my first child, my mom said to me, you're preparing for like the birth of this child, which is great. You're taking classes, you're reading books, like you're really focused on the birth experience. But you realize, Melissa, like you're going to have a baby after this. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm just dealing with this first part, which it can feel overwhelming. But I do think there's also like a lack of, even just having conversations of like, okay, so what's the setup going to be like when the baby comes? Who's there to help you? Like, who can you turn to for support emotionally when you're sleep deprived, you're hormonal, and you're losing your mind?
Yep, it's so true. We're focused on child care, but there's very, very little mother care.
Yes.
And there's not even an acknowledgement of the importance of that, and what the lack of it actually ends up doing to us as people and our sense of self, and and the ripple effect that has on culture at large when mothers start off their mothering experience feeling inadequate, feeling stressed, feeling overworked, so tired that again it's a bit of a setup. And then we get into this, like so many people become hyper focused on what's the right way. Like I need to plug into a certain parenting paradigm, and we move away from trusting our instincts.
Yes.
Because our instincts we hardly even have touch with, a couple things. We're not always in touch with those instincts when we're super sleep deprived, when we're in we're in survival mode.
Oh, yes.
If we had the support around that brand new early childhood time, I think that it would be easier to hear those instincts and honor them. But what happens is we hear something and we go, no, like that can't be right. We're not taught to trust our instincts.
I mean, case in point, I hear many of my new mom clients saying, well, I've got the baby in the crib and I was told to cry it out, but it just feels so completely wrong to me. It's like this primal feeling that I just can't explain. I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Been there. And they feel completely ashamed and wrong. It's like such a polarity between, oh, if you breastfeed your baby versus bottle feeding, or if you co-sleep versus crib sleeping, or if you cry it out or don't cry it out. I feel like either way, we are so screwed. And nobody, I wouldn't say nobody, fewer people, the minority of people, I think, in this society don't say, you know what, mom, like, you know your baby best. You've carried your baby for 9+ months. Like, how do you feel? What do you want? What works with you and your family? You've got this, and let's just take it step by step and really improve your confidence so that you can feel good for the steps that you make with your family, not necessarily what some book author says or some, sleep consultant or coach, which again, they have their place and time. But I just hear over and over again that if they don't follow X, Y, and Z and they don't do it perfectly, you're going to screw up your child, or your child's, in this example, going to be in your bed until you're 25 or until they're 25, So there's just so much fear about screwing it up.
And a lot of shame.
Yes.
Around doing it wrong, and which leads to a greater sense of isolation, because if we think we're doing something wrong and all of the culture around us is projecting this perfected image of motherhood, we become less and less inclined to reach out with our messy lives, which everybody has. But we don't know anymore because everything's like Instagram perfected, so that's a whole other subject, right? There's a whole other factor in this, is how polished everything looks on the outside of people's lives. And
right.
We go up in our own messy households and go, oh my gosh, I'm failing at this. It doesn't look anything like what that looks like, even though that's sort of staged, the presentation that so many people give of parenthood. So I think that even social media is, it's connecting us on the one hand, it's leading to increased shallow connections, less of the soulful, messy connections that we're really hungry for at this point in life.
Absolutely. And I think you said it best, the perfected image of motherhood. And that is, I think, what so many women struggle with, feeling alone, feeling isolated, and feeling ashamed of, maybe that person took a picture on a really good day or a really good moment, or the minute was like, great. So they took it. And then after that, it was a disaster again. Because I don't know about you, Beth, but every mother that I have met has never had it all figured out, has never had it perfectly done, A through Z, matched up. Their child eats everything. They go to sleep. They wear the perfect outfits. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, and it shouldn't have to happen.
No, it shouldn't have to happen. And I think that's actually kind of an indicator that someone is not necessarily living a very authentic life.
Good point.
It all looks that way on the outside, then actually that makes me question more than anything what's actually happening behind closed doors, because everybody's got their mess. And what I would love to see is a shift into celebrating that messy. Wow, this time of life during early childhood, and then keep, as you go. I'm raising teenagers now. It's totally messy.
Right.
And I've gotten to the point now that I recognize that's not only okay, but it's normal, and there's really actually nothing wrong with it. And when coming to that piece around life is messy, and I don't have to pretend it isn't. And I now surround myself with people who get that. My closest friends, they all live messy lives too, and we kind of help each other through the muck of it and go, yeah, it's messy, life's hard, You got this, and can be each other's cheerleaders through the messy times instead of trying to pretend that it isn't.
And so how would you, before we end, I think it's really important that we offer the women that are listening some kind of ideas or thoughts or tips they can think about, whether they, are just thinking about having a baby, or whether they're pregnant, or they're in the muck of it, as you said. What can help them prepare themselves for modern day motherhood, and so that they can feel more connected, they can feel less alone when they're not within the village?
A few things. The first one, I think that is so essential, is that we recognize that each of us is different. We all have needs as individuals. That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just we're humans. We have needs. To be able to start to identify those needs, for example, if you may have a need for alone time, And that is not something that you have to be ashamed of or that should have to be justified. In order to be a whole, thriving human being, I need alone time and a lot of it personally. If I don't get it, I don't know, I can't be my fullest self. So the more I've started to own that part of who I am, recognize and honor that need, and start to take steps toward meeting it and taking care of myself, that becomes, that the idea that self-care isn't just exercise and food and sleeping enough, but it's looking at who am I and as a person, and what do I need in order to feel fulfilled. So that may be connection with girlfriends on a regular basis. It may be, the idea that some people really want their baby to be sleeping with them because that feels right and feels wonderful. And some people would go insane if they had that much all night long. Mm-hmm. Those are okay. I think self-awareness is huge. The more we can know ourselves, the more we can come to honor ourselves. And then self-compassion, to be able to go, this is who I am. And that's a beautiful thing. And be able to, I think the more we can cultivate those things, self-awareness, self-compassion, the more we can keep at bay all these messages that are coming in about who we should be and how we should be doing things right. Another thing that I think is super essential is recognizing how destructive this model of independence can be, particularly in the season of our lives. We need each other. We are not a species meant to live in isolation. And so that, for me, really looks like a need for more courageous connections. So reaching out, figuring out the kinds of connections that actually help feed us, because myself, for example, not all connection feeds me. There's a lot of it that actually is pretty draining. So I've had to distinguish what kinds of friendships am I looking for? What kinds of conversations help me to feel fed instead of drained, and honoring those things about myself, and making sure that we're not celebrating, or that we're not setting ourselves up by saying, well, if I'm independent and I can do this on my own, somehow that's successful. Going, it is really not only okay that I need people, but that's a healthy thing that I need people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Wired for connection.
Absolutely. So the community, hugely important.
Back to the community, and also recognizing that there are seasons of our lives when no kind of needs to be the default, like instead of saying yes to, oh, sure, I'll take on this and this and this. And as a sense of identity that we stay busy, that we actually tend toward the opposite and go, no, not now. Got enough on my plate, and we get away from busy and overwhelmed as markers of success and productivity, because it's also productive to take a nap, and it's also productive to have, an afternoon where you're just sitting and trying to sort of figure out what you're feeling after having been so busy or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. Kind of our own markers of success when it comes to motherhood.
And I think that's such a good point too, because a lot of the mothers that I know, especially newly on, when you have a baby and you're feeding the baby, if you're breastfeeding and you kind of feel solely responsible. I know I did, sort of like, yeah, I've got my husband there and he's amazing and he's a great father and all that. But like, this is really my job and I have to take it on and I have to feed the baby and make sure the baby stays alive. And, if the baby wakes up in the middle of the night, it's up to me. And it got to a point where I was just taking on, even though he was saying, I'm willing to do it. I'm happy to help. Let me do this. Let me do that. And I would just feel this total pressure of like, no, I've got to manage it all. I've got to do the laundry. I have to keep the house clean. I have to organize, everything. I have to take care of the baby. And I just think as a culture and this idea of modern day motherhood, I see it in the people that I work with. I see it in myself. I see it with friends, that there is this kind of undercurrent of we have to take it all on and we have to be really, really, really good at it. And the only thing, I was having this thought the other day, it was back in the 1950s where it was sort of expected that, and I'm using that as a marker, I'm not saying exactly 1950, but women were sort of expected to stay home and raise the children and all of that. And now, I'm a working mom and going back to work, it's sort of like, okay, so now the expectation that I put on myself is I am to take care of the house. I'm to take care of the children. I'm have, organize everything that goes along with that. Plus I have to work. And, I could say that if my husband was not a very good helper, I could blame it on him, but he's not. He's fantastic. And it's really me. It's really me putting all that pressure on myself to get it all done and to get it all done really well.
So true. So, and that comes back to this idea of the modern day oppressors. A lot of it is the oppression we're feeling are the stories that we tell ourselves about. So this idea that we're supposed to be able to keep up with it all is a really, really oppressive storyline.
Absolutely.
Into it, that's us putting that pressure on ourselves. Like you said, a lot of us do have really supportive spouses. We're not necessarily claiming the space or the time for ourselves that we need in order to take care of ourselves and honor ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, I love those points that you set out, and I'm just so grateful that you came on today. And I really encourage people to check out Beth's blog, and specifically one of my favorite pieces that we talked about before, The Absence of the Village. And I know people are going to want to know more about you and where they can find your information. So can you share with us how they would do that?
Sure. My blog is called Revolution from Home, and you can contact me through there. I do offer one-on-one coaching for women and mothers, and I have yearly programs. My program for this year is called Motherworthy, and it's full for this year, but I'll be enrolling again at the end of the summer. And you can find me on Facebook, Revolution from Home, on what are all the other ones?
Instagram.
Those are the two. Those are the two I'm mostly on, Instagram and Facebook.
Wonderful, Beth. Well, we look forward to a lot more amazing writing coming out, and we'll definitely check out some of the courses that you offer. And thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. I loved this conversation with Beth. She is one of the easiest and most accepting people to talk to. I will definitely go back and listen to this one over and over. And if you like today's podcast, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. To get our show notes, go to www.honestmamas.com/episode-24. Sign up for our Honest Mamas e-course and get for more information. You can go to honestmamas.com and also join our community on Facebook, facebook.com/Honest Mamas Community, where these conversations and way more will continue.